Good morning, students. Now we are continuing with the previous topic. In the previous class, we have discussed about variables. What is a variable? What are the different types of variables? And especially we have strongly mentioned about independent variable and dependent variable. Once we have identified the variable, then the next step in research is formulating hypothesis. So in every research, a researcher is testing hypothesis. So all the data collection is done, all the analysis is done in order to test hypothesis. So that is the importance of hypothesis in a research. So formulating a correct hypothesis is the key aspect of research. For that, we should know what is hypothesis. Hypothesis is a formal statement of predicted relationship between variables in a research study. So this is a prediction. Just before starting the actual study, once we identified the variables, they are saying that there shall be a relationship with these type of relationship between the variables. That is why we are testing. For example, in a study, we are saying that there is a relationship between height and weight of under 5 children. So that we are predicting. Or there is a force by which the apple is coming down, that we are predicting. There is some pulling force is there. And we test this by collecting data. We analyze the data. And finally we say that my prediction is right. So this is the theory that I have formulated based on the prediction. Or we can say that my prediction is wrong also. These two things can happen. Now, take for example, in my room, the tube light is not burning. So what type of prediction I can make? The first thing is there is no electricity. Second thing is there shall be some problem with the chalk or tube, or there can be some problem with the switch, or there can be any other problems. So first we check whether there is electricity or not. Found that electricity is there. Then we check whether the chalk is working, or the starter is working, or we'll turn the tube light and see whether tube light is working, and everything is okay. Then we go to the switch box and see whether the connection is okay. So finally we say that this prediction is right and all the other predictions are wrong, so we repair the tube light. So this is the role of hypothesis. We predict the relationship between variables, especially between the dependent and independent variables, just before starting the study, and we formally state that. And at the end of the study, either we accept our hypothesis or we reject our hypothesis. That is the whole research study. So we know that from the definition itself, we identified that hypothesis is very important in a study. Again, we have to remember that in some studies, for example, a descriptive study or a survey study, there will not be much variables. There is no independent and dependent variables. So in those type of studies, it is not possible to formulate a hypothesis. Hypothesis is not possible. Only thing is we can do some assumptions. We assume something. It is not hypothesis. The assumptions cannot be tested. So there can be some research studies, for example, the historical studies, possible, but historical studies, survey studies, some form of descriptive studies, etc. Hypothesis formulation is not done. Still we do even in qualitative studies, still we do research, we conduct research, but without hypothesis. But in higher forms of research, where a relationship is established, we are trying to find the relationship, especially the experimental studies, quasi-experimental studies, hypothesis is very important. Now, what is the need for hypothesis? Why we have to formulate? What is the role of hypothesis? The first thing is, hypothesis is theory based. So a theory can be tested only through hypothesis. Now, what is a theory? We'll learn along the next class, next part of this unit. And we know that theory is a very complex thing. It consists of so many aspects. So we break down the theory into several hypotheses, and each hypothesis will be tested. Finally, we say that my theory is completely right, partially right, or partially wrong, or it's completely wrong. So the theory can be tested only through hypothesis, fragmenting that into, breaking that into different hypotheses. The second thing is the aim. The whole research is done to test hypothesis, as I mentioned. The ultimate function of the whole research, finally we can say that my prediction, my hypothesis is right, or my hypothesis is wrong. Okay. Now the third is, it will give objectivity for the research study. So in order to maintain objectivity of the research, we certainly need one or more hypotheses. Again, we have to remember, as the number of objectives increases, number of hypotheses also naturally increase. So the hypothesis basically depend on your objective of the study. That depend on the question, research question. From research question, we formulate objective. From objective, we derive hypothesis. So in order to maintain objectivity, that is different, of research, hypothesis is needed. Now the fourth one is, hypothesis is the scientific base for a research study. A research becomes more scientific through hypothesis. Now we know that research is a science, and the essence of the science is developing theories, and these theories are developed through hypothesis. So research becomes scientific through hypothesis. Now it gives a good direction for research. Hypothesis provides a direction of all the activities of research, just like objective, because hypothesis also developed based on the objective. It gives a clear direction, how to move, where to turn, where to reach, what are the important other components needed, what is the speed. So everything, all the direction depends on hypothesis. It provides direction. Now it adds clarity for our research. Hypothesis makes all concepts and activities more clear. then it serves as a link. Hypothesis is needed to link various steps in research, especially between theory and practice. So that serves as a connecting link between theory and practice, and also between one step to another steps in research process. Then it serves as a motivation factor for the researcher and all the persons concerned with the research. It is needed to stimulate proper thinking and is a force to direct prediction into a reality. So finally, for conclusion of the research, hypothesis is needed is as a framework on which the final conclusion of the research is done. Because as I mentioned, finally we say that we conclude the research by saying that accept or reject my hypothesis. So that is the final conclusion of the research. So what are the need for hypothesis? The need for hypothesis in research is a theory base, gives aim, objectivity for the research, the scientific base gives direction, add clarity, serves as a link, it motivates, and finally conclude research with the help of hypothesis. So these are the need for hypothesis in a research study. Next we'll see what are the characteristics of hypothesis. When we write down hypothesis or when we formulate hypothesis in a research study, how a hypothesis should be formulated? What are the characteristics needed for a hypothesis? The first characteristic is a clarity. The hypothesis should be very clear, like a crystal clear water. One who is reading your hypothesis should understand what it means. The wordings, the prepositions used to formulate hypothesis can be simple and clear. Next thing is hypothesis should be concise. It's not very big sentences. Now, sometimes in complex researches, PhD studies and all, we can see complex sentences with lot of variables together, with a lot of relations between the variables. But as far as possible, make hypothesis into concise, and the next point is simple. So once it is clear and it is concise, that will be simple also. So that is the third criteria. The fourth one is purposive. The hypothesis need a purpose, because we are doing the whole research based on the hypothesis. So without a purpose we cannot do research. So hypothesis should be formulated with a purpose. As I mentioned before, hypothesis should be objective also. The subjectivity will not be there, should not be included while writing or formulating hypothesis. It should be objective. Then the next point is hypothesis should be relevant to the research. Now we had to formulate hypothesis based on the objective. Now we cannot consider any other factors, extraneous variables or any other things in formulating hypothesis. It should be relevant to your study, relevant to the population of your study, and relevant to the question that you want to answer. Then hypothesis always stated in a testable form, because we want to test hypothesis. The whole research study is testing our hypothesis and saying that this is right or wrong. So when you formulate state hypothesis also in a testable form, we always say that I will prove my hypothesis at this much significant level. So this, when we learn about statistics, we will test everything at a significant level. So this significant is also mentioned like 0.001, 0.05. There are a lot of levels are there. Normally hypothesis will be tested at 0.05 level. So it should be at the testable level and testable format. Then hypothesis should be specific to your research, specific to the variables you are studying. And hypothesis should be constructive in nature. And it always indicate the relationship between the variables. And it should be progressive. So these are some of the characteristics of hypothesis. So I'll repeat once more. The hypothesis should be clear, concise, simple, purposive, objective, relevant, testable, specific, constructive, indicate relationship, and progressive. Now next we'll see about the types of hypothesis. Now to remember, this topic is very important for the examination also, like in research. In every alternate year, we can expect at least one question from hypothesis, either a definition or a short note about hypothesis. So you have to prepare this topic for writing a short note, where you have to write the definition of hypothesis and the characteristics of hypothesis, and even the types of hypothesis also we should be able to mention. So there are different type of hypotheses are there. The first type is called as the simple versus complex hypothesis. What is a simple hypothesis? As I stated before, with the expected relationship between one dependent variable and one independent variable. This is a simple hypothesis. For example, if I am saying that there is a direct relationship between height and weight. This height increase, weight also will increase. So this is a simple hypothesis. Only one dependent variable and one independent variable, and we are saying this is a relationship. There is a direct relationship, or as height increases, weight also will increase. So this is a simple hypothesis. Whereas complex hypothesis with the more than one variables or more than one relationship. This is complex hypothesis. Okay, so there can be more than one relation. Can be increase or decrease or directly proportional, indirectly proportional, or as one increase, other decrease. That can be what shall I say is significant relations or insignificant relations. So many type of relationships when we formulate in the same hypothesis, that becomes complex hypothesis. Then there are multivariate hypotheses there. So this is stated with more than one relationship among multiple variables. There's only not two variables are considered. There are more than two variables are considered in formulating a single hypothesis. And there will be multiple relations also between these variables will be studied in the same hypothesis, single hypothesis. So this we call as the multivariate hypothesis. So simple hypothesis, complex hypothesis, and multivariate hypothesis. Again, we'll see other type of hypothesis directional hypothesis versus non-directional hypothesis. So directional hypothesis, as a name indicates, it gives the direction of relationship between the variables in the hypothesis. So what is, it's not simply saying that there is a significant relation. We are giving the direction also, what type of relationship is existing. And we use the terms like there is a direct relation, as I mentioned, there is a direct relation between height and weight. There's a positive relation. This is a directional hypothesis. Or there will be an inverse relation, negative relation. Or we say that one is higher than the other, or one is lower than the other, or one increases in comparison to other variables, or one decreases in comparison to other variables. For example, there is a significant increase in the knowledge of mothers after an educational program between the pre-test value. So there is an increase. Or we say that there is a significant decrease is there. One is greater than, or other one is lesser than. So these are the direction that we are giving. So we can test the direction, whether it is increasing or decreasing, etc. For example, we are doing an intervention study. We are giving a drug, checking hemoglobin before and after, and we say that the hemoglobin, the post-intervention hemoglobin level will be always higher than, will be a significant increase than the pre-intervention hemoglobin level. So this is the direction, and we say that the hypothesis is right or wrong. There are non-directional hypotheses also there. So this does not mention the relationship. We will say that there is a significant relationship between height and weight. There is a significant relationship between smoking and lung cancer. We are not saying whether it increase or decrease. We only mention that there is a significant relationship between these two variables. These are the non-directional hypotheses. So does not mention the direction and nature of relationship between variables. Now, other two type of variables are the hypotheses are the inductive hypothesis and deductive hypothesis. Inductive hypothesis, as the name indicates, it inducts or constructs. So these are the generalized statement about specific observation. So the specific things are added together for a generalization. For example, we are making some observation in a cancer ward that majority of the patients with lung cancer have a history of chronic smoking. These are the many observations we are making, many specific things, and we are adding these together, and we make a generalization saying that smoking increases the risk of lung cancer. This is the generalized statement. We are making a lot of specific observations. And the other ways, on the vice versa, deductive hypothesis is deriving specific statement about general observations. For example, all rich person own a car. That is a general observation. We are seeing that all rich person have a car. And then we are making a specific that my teacher is a rich person. So there is a greater chance for him to own a car. We do not know whether he has a car or not, but we are making a specific statement from a general observation. So this is deduction from general to specific. Whereas the induction is there are so many specific observations we make generalization. In other ways, you can say that we are making the heart and the human being. I mean, there are two things, two observations. So these two observations we are just making. We are just seeing that so many human beings we are examined and see that they have a heart. For example, in Trishur, human beings we have examined. In Tamil Nadu we have examined. In America we have examined. All of them have heart. These are the specific observations. And after observing that, we are making a generalization that all human beings have heart. This is inductive hypothesis. And what is a deductive hypothesis is, in the same thing, we can make it a deductive hypothesis that all human beings have heart. That is my general observation. And I'm saying that in my class, one student, like for example, any one student, I'm saying that this particular person is a human being. So she or he is also having a heart. This is from the general thing. I'm making a specific statement, and we can check whether that person with the stethoscope to see whether heart rate is there, pulse rate is there, and all other cardiac functions with the ECG, etc. And finally, I can say that this person is having a heart. So this is how we accept or reject our hypothesis. So this is how we formulate an inductive hypothesis and deductive hypothesis. Now, next type of hypothesis are the research hypothesis and null hypothesis. And these are the two very important hypotheses in research. We have to formulate a research hypothesis and null hypothesis, or otherwise called as a statistical hypothesis. Now, what is the difference between these two? A research hypothesis states that there is a relationship between variables. For example, there is a relationship between smoke and incidence of lung cancer, smoking and incidence of lung cancer. So this is a research hypothesis. This is what we make before starting the study. We are saying research hypothesis is formulated, but this cannot be tested actually. The tester will be able to convert that into a testable form so that it is amenable for statistical testing. For that, we convert all the research hypotheses into a null hypothesis, stating that there is no relationship between the variables. Then when we are able to test that, we are saying that there is no relationship. That is a testable form. We can say that after connecting that, whether this null hypothesis is right, or we accept null hypothesis, or we reject null hypothesis. So we are converting a research hypothesis into a no relationship format that we call as a null hypothesis. For example, the previous research hypothesis, we are converting into that there is no relationship between smoking and incidence of lung cancer. So this is the difference between a research hypothesis and a null hypothesis. For example, if we have a bucket full of something, it is not a testable form. We can make a prediction saying that this bucket is full of rice. Now, if we are saying that there is nothing in that, that is more testable form. This is the difference between research hypothesis and the null hypothesis. Then what are the important sources of hypothesis? How we can formulate hypothesis? We can formulate hypothesis based on our observations. The researcher need a lot of observations, and past experience is needed. Then information gained from other persons and sources like reading literatures, uh, advice from the experienced persons like research guide, etc., is needed for formulating hypothesis. Then we can formulate hypothesis with the help of theoretical framework that also will give us guidance and direction to formulate hypothesis. So hypothesis, in order to formulate a good hypothesis, that's always from the experience and our observation. There are so many type of relationship can be there. Can formulate so many type of relationship predictions. But whether we are making the correct prediction in a testable form, that depends on our past experience, our ability and skill in observations and establishing relationship, etc. So this is a source of hypothesis. Now, in many cases, criminal cases, now the police people also formulate hypothesis, and they will test hypothesis by the detective stories, by collecting data. And in CBI, Diary Corp, etc., there are so many films out there. They make a lot of predictions, and the nature of prediction, whether that will become right or wrong, depends on their intelligence, their experience, their ability to predict, etc. So this is the same thing for the research also. This is very important. Our predictions depends on all these factors, so these become the sources of hypothesis. These are the elements of hypothesis. When we formulate hypothesis, there should be two variables are needed, because we are establishing relationship between two variables. Probably the dependent variable and the independent variables are needed for formulating hypothesis, and we should be able to establish some type of relationship between the variables. For example, a person A and the person B in a classroom. If the class teacher say that there is a good relationship or there is a bad relationship between these two students, that's the element. Some type of relationship is needed to establish a hypothesis. Then direction of change, especially for the directional hypothesis, that is increase or decrease or good or bad, whatever it is. Then mention about the subject or the population. So that is also needed for formulating hypothesis. So these are the elements: independent and dependent variables, some type of relationship, direction of change, and mention about the subject or population.